Hello, and welcome to Fionas Fables. Come join me in my menagerie, and especially Tina and Fifi, as we read an excerpt from the lovely Anne Rice's, writing as A.N. Roquelaure, beauty series. I hope you enjoy it. Today's topic will cover pony play. And, well, let's just get started, shall we? Amongst my menagerie, all the furries that I've killed. Well, actually, no, they're just my alter egos. Anyway, so I'm just going to read an excerpt. And this chapter is called The Bridal Path. As soon as Beauty opened her eyes from sleep, she could feel a new excitement in the castle. Torches everywhere brilliantly illuminated the slaves' hall, and all about her princes and princesses were receiving elaborate preparation. The hair of the princesses was being combed and studded with flowers. The princes were being polished with oil, their stiff curls combed just as carefully as those of the young women. But Beauty was hastily taken from bed by Leon, who seemed uncommonly excited. "It's festival night, Beauty," he said, "and I've allowed you to sleep a long time. We must hurry." "Festival night," she whispered, but she was already being placed on the table for grooming. At once, he parted her hair and started to braid it. She felt the air on her neck and hated it, and she realized he had started the braids very high on her head, so she would look even more girlish than Lady Juliana. A long black leather thong was braided into the hair on both sides and knotted around the ends with a little brass bell affixed to it. When Leon dropped the braids, they were heavy against Beauty's breasts, and her neck was exposed, as well as all of her face. "Charming, charming," Leon mused, with his usual air of satisfaction. "But now, your boots." And, slipping her into a pair of high, black leather boots, he told her to stand in them while he bent to lace them tightly to her knees, and then smooth the leather around her ankles until it was cleaving like a glove there. Not until Beauty lifted her foot did she realize each boot was fitted at toe and heel with a horseshoe, and the tops were hard and strong so that nothing could hurt her toes. "But what is happening? What is the bridal path?" she asked in a great fluster. "Shh," Leon said, pinching and prodding her breasts to give them, as he said, some color. He then glossed Beauty's eyelids and eyelashes with oil and smoothed a little rouge into her lips and into her nipples. Beauty drew back instinctively, but his touch was sure and quick, and he took no notice of her. But what bothered her most was that her body felt cool and vulnerable. She could feel the sheathing of leather against her calves, and all the rest of her felt worse than naked. It was more terrible than any of the smaller adornments. "What is going to take place?" she asked again. But Leon had thrust her over the end of the table and now oiled her buttocks vigorously. "Well heeled," he said. "The prince must have guessed last night you would run tonight, and he spared you." Beauty felt his strong fingers plying her flesh, and a dread came over her. So they would spank her, but they always did. Only it would be in the presence of many others? Every humiliating spank she had received before the eyes of others had cost her dearly, though she knew now she would suffer any amount of paddling for the prince, But she had not really been given a hard, thorough spanking for the pleasure of others since the inn on the road where the innkeeper's daughter had spanked her for the soldiers and the common people at the windows. But it must come, she thought, and a vision of the court watching it as some ritual caused her to feel an undeniable curiosity that soon enough gave way to panic. "My lord, please tell me." Amid the crowd about her, she saw other girls with braided hair and boots. She was not alone, and there were princes being fitted with boots also. Through it all, there moved a handful of young princes on their hands and knees, polishing boots as quickly as they could, their own buttocks raw, their necks encircled by a little cord of leather, to which was attached a sign that Beauty could not read. But now, as Leon brought her up standing again and gave her some finishing touches to her lips and eyelashes, one of these princes was now buffing her boots, though he was weeping. His buttocks were as red as it could have been. And she saw the sign about his neck said, "I am in disgrace," in small letters. A page approached and gave the prince a sound crack with a belt to hurry him on to another. But Beauty had no time to think of it. Leon had affixed the accursed little brass bells to her nipples. She shuddered almost instinctively, but they were firmly attached, and he told her to fold her arms behind her back tightly. "Now forward, only you are to bend your knees slightly and to march, lifting each knee high," he told her. She started, awkwardly, reluctant to obey, but then she saw all about her other princesses marching in an almost sprightly manner, their breasts bouncing gracefully as they moved into the corridor. She hurried, the heavy boots difficult for her to lift with any decorum, but soon she had fallen into a rhythm, and Leon was walking beside her. "Now, darling," he said, "the first time is always difficult. Festival night is frightening. I had thought some easier duty would be yours this first time, but the Queen has ordered you especially for the bridal path, and the Lady Juliana will drive you." "Ah, but what?" "Shh, or I shall have to gag you, and that will very much displease the Queen, as well as make your mouth quite ugly." All the girls were now in a long room, and through narrow windows on one wall, Beauty could see the garden. Torches flared in the dark trees, throwing an uneven glare on the leafy boughs above them. The line of girls formed right beside these windows, and Beauty was now able to see more of what lay beyond them. There was a great roar, as of many people conversing, laughing, and then, to her shock, Beauty saw slaves all through the garden, positioned in various ways for their torment. On high stakes here and there were strapped princes and princesses, painfully contorted, their ankles bound to the stakes, their shoulders bent over the tops of them. They seemed no more than ornaments, the torchlight causing their twisted limbs to glow, the hair of the princesses falling free in the air behind them. Surely they could see only the sky above, though all could see their miserable contortions. And everywhere beneath were the lords and ladies, the light falling upon a long embroidered cloak here, a pointed hat there, with a veil trailing airily from it. There were hundreds in the garden, these tables placed far back into the trees, as far as Beauty could see in all directions. Beautifully adorned slaves moved about, pitchers in hand, little gold chains fixed to their breasts, the princes adorned with gold rings on their erect organs. They hurried to fill the goblets, past the platters of food, and as in the great hall, there was music. The line of girls before Beauty grew restless. Beauty could hear one girl crying as her groom tried to comfort her, but most of the others were obedient. Here and there a groom rubbed more oil into plump buttocks, or whispered in a princess's ear, and Beauty's sense of apprehension deepened. She did not want to look into the yard. It frightened her too much. But she could not prevent herself. And each time she saw some new horror. A great wall to the left was adorned with spread-eagled slaves, and on a huge serving cart she saw slaves fixed to the giant wheels, turned upside down, over and over as the cart was moved forward. "But what will happen to us?" Beauty whispered. The girl in line before her, who could not be quieted, was now hanging by her ankle from the hand of a strong page, who punished her swiftly. Beauty grasped to see her spanked, her braids falling to the floor beneath her. "Shh, it is best for her," Leon said. "It will exhaust her fear and drain her slightly, and she will be all the more free on the bridle path. But tell me, you must be still. You will see the others first and understand. And as we draw nearer to your turn, I shall instruct you. Remember, this is a special night of high festivity, but the queen will be watching, and the prince will be furious if you fail him." Beauty's eyes returned to the garden. The great cart of steaming food had moved along, and for the first time she saw the distant fountain. Here, too, were bound slaves, their arms linked as they stood knee-deep in the water surrounding the central pillar, its sparkling flow pouring down over them. Their bodies glistened under the water. The groom beside the girl in front of Beauty laughed softly and said that someone was miserable to be missing festival night, but it was her own fault. "Surely," Leon agreed, when the groom glanced back to him. "They are talking about Princess Lizetta," he told Beauty, who was still in the Hall of Punishment and cursing, no doubt, to miss this excitement. To miss the excitement? But in spite of her fear, Beauty nodded at this as if it were perfectly natural. A calm descended upon her in which she heard her own heart and felt her body as if there were limitless time in which to know it. She felt the sheathing of the leather boots, the click of her horseshoes on the stones, the air on her neck, her belly, and she thought, "Yes, this is what I am. So I should not wish to miss it either. Yet I rebel in my soul. Why do I rebel? Oh, I despise that miserable Lord Gerhardt. Why must he drive me?" asked the girl before her in a low voice. The groom said something that made her laugh. "But he's so slow," she said, savoring every moment. "And I like to run." The groom laughed at her. She went on, "And what do I get out of it? The most miserable spanking. I could take the spanking if I could only cut loose and run." "You want everything," said the groom. "And what do you want? Don't tell me you don't like it when I'm covered with welts and almost blistered." The groom laughed. He had a cheerful face, and was small of build, keeping his hands clasped behind his back, though his chestnut hair fell down over his eyes slightly. "My dear, I love everything about you," he said, "and so does Lord Gerhardt. Now say something to comfort Leon's little pet. She's so frightened." The girl turned, and Beauty saw her pert face, eyes slanting at the ends somewhat like the eyes of the queen, but they were smaller, with no crease. She smiled with full, red lips. "Don't be frightened, Beauty," she said, "but you have no need for comfort from me. You have the prince. I have only Lord Gerhardt." A great current of laughter passed through the garden. The musicians were playing loudly, with much strumming of their lutes and tapping of the tambourines, and then Beauty quite distinctly heard the thunder of hoofs approaching. A rider shot past the windows, his cape flying out behind him, his horse bridled in silver and gold, which made the streak of light as he rushed forward. "Oh, at last, said the girl in front of Beauty. Other riders were coming, and they were making a line all along the wall that almost blocked Beauty's view of the garden. She could not bear to look up at them, But she did, and saw they were splendid lords and ladies, and each held the reins of the horse in his or her left hand, and in the right a long rectangular black paddle. "Now, into the room," said Lord Gregory, and the slaves who had waited in a long line were ushered into the next chamber, where they stood directly facing the arched door to the garden. Beauty could see now that a young prince was first in line, and she saw that mounted lord, his horse pawing the dirt before the archway. Leon moved Beauty a little to the side. "Now you can see better," he said. And she saw the prince clasp his hands behind his neck and step forward. A trumpet sounded, catching Beauty off guard, so she gasped, and a cry rose from the crowd behind the archway. The young slave was forced out and at once greeted by the black leather paddle of the lord on horseback. Immediately, the slave commenced to run. The mounted lord rode right beside him, and the sound of the paddle came loud and distinct as the murmur of the crowd seemed to rise and mingle itself with the faint ripples of laughter. Beauty was aghast as she saw the two figures disappear down the path together. "I cannot do it. I cannot," she said. "I cannot be made to run. I will fall. I will fall to the ground and cover myself. To be tied, to be bound in front of so many was dreadful enough, but this is impossible." But another rider was already in place, and a young princess was forced suddenly forward. The paddle found its mark. The princess let out a little cry, and was immediately running desperately fast along the bridle path, the rider after her, spanking her fiercely. Before Beauty could take her eyes off them, another slave was on the way, and her eyes blurred as she saw far ahead a dim line of torches outlining the path that seemed to go on and on through the trees, past an endless vista of feasting lords and ladies. "Now, Beauty, you see what is required. And don't cry. If you're crying, it will be harder. You must put your mind on running fast, keeping your hands on your neck. Here, place them there now. And you must lift your knees high, and try not to squirm to escape the paddle. It will catch you no matter what you do. But I warn you, no matter how many times I tell you that, you will find yourself trying to run away from it. That is the trick. But remain graceful." Another slave was running, and then another. And the young girl who had cried earlier was upended again, dangling, as she was spanked. "Dreadful of her," said the princess in front of Beauty. "She'll be spanked hard enough in a moment." Suddenly, there were only 3 slaves before Beauty in the archway. "Oh, but I can't," she cried to Leon. "Nonsense, my darling. Follow the path. It will unwind slowly before you. You will see its turns well in advance, and stop only if you see the slave before you stopped. Now and then the line is stopped, for as the slaves come before the queen, they must stop for praise or condemnation. She is on a great pavilion to your right, but don't glance at her when you step out, or the paddle will catch you off guard." "Oh, please, I shall faint. I can't. Beauty, Beauty," said the pretty princess in front of her. "Just follow my example." And Beauty realized with horror that there was no one left but this girl. But then that one who had just been spanked was placed before her and ushered out to the waiting paddle. The girl was frantic, sobbing, but she kept her hands on her neck, and soon she was running beside her laughing rider, a tall young lord who lifted his arm way back as he spanked her. Suddenly, another rider appeared, the elderly Lord Gerhard, and as Beauty watched in terror, the pretty princess ran out to receive the first blows and run with graceful lifts of her knees beside him. But for all her complaints, the lord's horse seemed to move terribly fast, and the paddle was loud and merciless. Beauty was forced to the threshold of the garden. For the first time, she stared at the true immensity of the court, the dozens upon dozens of tables that sprawled out on the green and appeared in great numbers in the forest beyond it. Everywhere were servants and naked slaves. It was perhaps 3 times the size she had judged from the windows. She felt tiny, insignificant for all her terror, lost, and without a name or a soul suddenly. What am I now? She might have thought, but she could not think. And as if in nightmare, she saw all the faces of those at the nearest tables, lords and ladies, twisted to see the bridal path. And far to her right loomed the pavilion of the queens, canopied and festooned with flowers. She was gasping for breath, and when she looked up and saw the splendid mounted figure of Lady Juliana, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude that it was she. Though she knew Lady Juliana would spank her perhaps all the harder to do her duty. The lovely lady's braids were done with the same silver that threaded her shapely gown. She seemed made for the side saddle in which she sat, and the handle of her paddle was laced to her wrist. She was smiling. There was no time to see more, to think more. Beauty was running forward, feeling the crunch of the bridle path under her horseshoes, hearing the stomp of hooves beside her. And though she thought it was not possible to endure such degradation, she felt the first cracking blow to her naked buttocks. It was so forceful it almost knocked her off balance. The stinging pain spread out from it like a warm fire, and Beauty realized she was rushing forward. The stomp of hooves deafened her, and the paddle caught her again and again, almost lifting her and forcing her forward. She realized she was crying out loud through her clenched teeth, her tears making a blur of the torches that clearly defined the path before her. And she was running fast towards the enclosing trees, though she could not escape the paddle. It was as Leon had warned her. It caught her over and over, and each time there was some hideous surprise because she was trying to outrun it. She could smell the horse, and when she widened her eyes and gasped for her breath, she saw everywhere, on either side of her, those torchlit and abundantly decked supper tables. Lords and ladies drank, supped, laughed, turned to glance at her perhaps, she did not know. She was sobbing and running frantically from the blows, which came harder and harder. Oh, please, please, Lady Juliana, she wanted to cry out, but she did not dare to ask for mercy. The path had turned, and she was following it only to see more and more nobles banqueting, and dimly before her the figure of the other rider and slave who had greatly outdistanced her. Her throat was burning as much as her sore flesh. Faster, Beauty, faster, and lift your legs higher, Lady Juliana sang out over the wind. Ah, yes, better, my darling. And there came another shock of pain, and another. The paddle found her thighs with a hard, uplifting slap, and then seemed to scoop up her buttocks. Beauty gave an open-mouthed cry because she could not stop it, and soon she heard her own wordless pleas as clearly as the horse's hooves pounding the cinders. Her throat constricted, even the soles of her feet burned, but nothing hurt as much as the quick, strong paddling. Lady Juliana seemed possessed of some evil genius, catching Beauty from one angle and then another, lifting her up again with the blows, smacking her hard, and then 3 or 4 times in rapid succession. The path had made another turn, and far ahead Beauty saw the walls of the castle. They were returning now. They would soon reach the Queen's canopied pavilion. Beauty felt as if all the breath had gone out of her, yet mercifully Lady Juliana slowed her pace, as did the riders before her. Beauty ran more slowly, knees high, and felt a great relaxation course through her. She could hear her own choking sobs, and feel the tears slipping down her face, and yet a puzzling sensation was passing over her. She felt suddenly calmed in some way. She did not comprehend it. She felt no rebellion suddenly, though the obligation to rebel prodded her. Perhaps she was only exhausted. But she knew only that she was a naked slave of the court, and anything might be done to her. Hundreds of lords and ladies watched her with amusement. It was nothing to them, and she was only one of many, and it had all been done 1,000 times, and would be done again, and she must do her best or take her place tethered to that beam in the hall of punishments, suffering for the amusement of no one. "Lift your knees, my precious darling," Lady Juliana said to her, as they were moving slowly now. "And oh, if you could only see how exquisite you are. You have done splendidly." Beauty tossed her head. She felt the heavy braids fall against her back, and suddenly, when the paddle struck her, she felt herself move so languidly with it. It was as if the strains and relaxation were softening her all over. Is that what they meant when they said that the pain would soften her? Yet she feared this relaxation, this despair. Was it despair? She did not know. She had no dignity in this moment. She saw herself as Lady Juliana must surely have seen her, and it seemed she almost preened as she imagined this, tossing her head again, pushing her breasts out proudly. "That's it. Lovely, lovely," Lady Juliana called out. The other rider had disappeared. The horse picked up its pace. The paddle struck Beauty violently again and drove her through the clustered tables as the crowd grew thicker, the castle coming closer, and suddenly they had stopped before the pavilion. Lady Juliana turned her mount to the side, and with small, prodding spanks, brought Beauty beside her to her attention. Beauty did not look up, but she could see the long garlands of flowers, the dim white vision of the canopy ballooning gently in the breeze, and a host of figures seated behind the festooned railing of the pavilions. Her body seemed consumed with fire. She could not catch her breath, and then she could hear the conversation above, the Queen's pure, icy voice, and others laughing. Her throat was raw, her buttocks pulsing with pain, and now Lady Juliana whispered, "She's pleased with you, Beauty. Now kiss my boots quickly, and drop down on your knees, and kiss the grass before the pavilion. Do it with spirit, my girl." Beauty obeyed without hesitation, and this is as if it were water washing through her. She felt again that calm, that sense of, what was it? Release? Resignation? "Nothing can save me," she thought. All the sounds about her mingled in a din. Her buttocks seemed to glow with pain, and she imagined a great light emanating from them. And then she was back on her feet, and another hard blow sent her crying into the dark cellar chamber of the castle. Slaves everywhere were thrown over barrels, their sore bodies being washed quickly with cool water. Beauty felt its flow over her abraded flesh, and then the soft toweling. At once, Leon had her on her feet. "You've pleased the Queen marvelously. Your form was magnificent. You were born for the bridal path." "But the prince," Beauty whispered, and she felt dizzy and mistakenly envisioned Prince Alexei. "Not tonight for you, lovely one. He is quite busy with 1,000 amusements, and you must be placed where you can serve and rest, as the exertion of the bridal path is quite enough in one night for a novice." He unfastened her braids and brushed out her hair in ripples. She was breathing deeply and evenly now and bent her forehead against his chest. "Was I truly graceful?" "Pricelessly beautiful," he whispered, "and Lady Juliana is thoroughly in love with you." But now he ordered her down on her knees and told her to follow him. She was suddenly out in the night again, on the warm grass, with the noisy crowd all around her. She saw the table legs, the gathered gowns, hands moving in the shadows. There was a shriek of laughter nearby, and then she saw before her a long banquet table covered with sweets, fruits, and pastries. 2 princes attended it, and decorative pillars stood at both ends to which slave girls were affixed, their hands above their heads, their feet chained slightly apart at the bottom. One of these was removed as Beauty approached, and she was quickly fastened in the girl's place, standing firmly, her head and swollen buttocks pressed back against the pillar. She could see the whole feast around her, even with her lids lowered, and she felt herself quite firmly bound in place, unable to move. And it did not matter. The worst was over. Even when a passing lord stopped to smile at her and pinch her nipples, she did not care. She was amazed to see the little brass bells had been taken away. She was so weary she hadn't noticed. Leon was still nearby, at her ear, and she was about to murmur some question as to how long she would be here, when quite distinctly in front of her she saw Prince Alexei. He was as beautiful as she had remembered, his auburn brown hair curling against the hollows of his handsome face, his soft brown eyes fixed on her, his lips spread easily in a smile, though he drew up to the table and gave his pitcher to be filled to one of those in attendance. Beauty stared furtively out of the corner of her eye. She saw his thick, hard sex, and the lush hair around it. The vision of the page, Felix, sucking it, filled her with sudden passion. She must have moaned or stirred, because Prince Alexei, glancing up at the distant pavilion before he bent over the table to gather some sweet, suddenly kissed her on the ear, brushing Leon aside as if he were nothing. "You behave yourself, you wicked prince," said Leon, but it was not playful. "I shall see you tomorrow night, my dearest," Prince Alexei whispered with a smile. "And don't be frightened of the Queen, for I shall be with you." Beauty's mouth quivered on the verge of a cry, but he was gone, and now Leon had drawn up to her ear again, cupping his hand as he whispered, "You're to see the Queen tomorrow night for a few hours, in her quarters." "Oh, no, no," Beauty wailed, tossing her head from side to side. "Don't be foolish. This is very good. You could not wish for better." And as he spoke, he slipped his hand between her legs and pinched her lips gently. She felt herself grow warm there. "I was on the pavilion while you were running. The Queen was impressed in spite of herself," he went on, "and the Prince said you had always shown such form and spirit, and again he pleaded for you, and that the Queen should not censor his passion. He agreed then not to see you tonight, but to have a dozen or so new princesses paraded before him." "Don't tell me any more," Beauty cried softly. "No, but don't you see? The Queen was enthralled with you, and he knew it. She watched you closely as you ran, impatient for you to come to the pavilion. And it was she who said perhaps she should taste your charms herself, to see if you were not as spoilt and vain as she had supposed. She will have you in her quarters tomorrow night after supper." Beauty cried softly, too spiritless to answer. "But, Beauty, this is a great privilege. There are slaves here who served years without ever being noticed by the Queen. You shall have your full opportunity to enchant her, and you shall, my dear, you shall. You cannot fail to do so. And the Prince has been clever for once. He has not worn his heart for all to see it." "But what will she do to me?" Beauty whimpered. And Prince Alexei, will he see all of it? Oh, what will she do? Oh, she shall only make a plaything of you, of course, and you shall try to please her. And that was a chapter from The Claiming of Sleeping Beauty by Anne Rice, writing as A.N. Roquelaure. Don't forget to come to see the fox hunt. We call it the chase. And enjoy Folsom. Well, honestly.